Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. The situation in Afghanistan continues to deteriorate. So the latest from U.S. officials is that the military has started withdrawing from Afghanistan, reducing troop presence. We don't know if it's like to the residual force of 2,500 or 1,000, or we have actually no idea. We're hoping for some more insight on that, just as you all are. We're going to give you the latest as to how we get it. But it is being reported that the U.S. has expedited a deal with unknown terms with the Taliban, and we actually may be out now in 72 hours. In fact, it's already started. So that also means that the White House could potentially leave several thousand Americans behind. Now, we're going from stranding Americans to abandoning them. The State Department said that the United States will continue helping at-risk Afghans leave by August 31st, a completely false promise, seeing that there will be zero military support on the ground by that time. Now, a discussion with the Taliban about extending the timeline for withdrawal has yielded nothing. This morning, after speaking with G7 leaders, Biden was informed that our allies were united in telling the Taliban that the evacuation would take as long as it takes. But Biden wasted no time in announcing afterwards that the United States would in fact be out by the 31st, publicly undercutting the alliance. President Biden won't extend the deadline, and the Taliban is demanding a full withdrawal by August 31st, no exceptions or extensions. They're dictating the rules now. Our CIA director met with senior Taliban leaders actually just yesterday, and it appears that not much came of it. However, we can apparently send the CIA director there and back to meet with the leader of the Taliban, but we can't extricate Americans or Afghan SIVs. Psaki said in the presser this afternoon that, quote, "This is the largest airlift in history," which is most assuredly not. These facts, like history of the Berlin airlift, for just one example, they're hidden on a thing called the internet. Given the current situation of having thousands of allies and Americans, maybe tens of thousands, as no one knows exactly how many who are still stranded, or abandoned rather, on the ground with no way to get to the airport, there are no good options. So here is Jen Psaki just a couple of hours ago addressing this problem.
A Taliban spokesman said today the group would bar Afghans from accessing the roads leading to the airport to allow foreigners to pass. And I guess for evacuation efforts, what does this mean for Afghans who assisted and can't get through now? What are you going to be? Does this effectively cut off those Afghans from being evacuated?
No, that is not how you should read it. One, I should note we have been in direct contact, not just with American citizens, but with SIV applicants, special immigrant visa applicants, and Afghans whose departure we are facilitating about how and when to come to the airport. And our expectation, which we have also conveyed to the Taliban, is that they should be able to get to the airport. It is also true, and I know this may be some of the confusion out there, that there are a number of Afghans who may not qualify for these programs. And we've seen over the past 9 days, a rush of people attempt to come to the airport. We certainly understand that, but that also creates a security risk and one that we have great concern about. So to be clear, individuals who are eligible for special immigrant visas or others who we are helping facilitate their evacuation and their departure, we are in touch with them or working to be in touch with them about how and when to come to the airport, as well as American citizens, as you well know, and we expect that they will be able to reach the airport.
Now, the concern is that we may actually have to engage in heavy fighting, especially given the deadline of the 31st, if we're not ever able to actually get everyone out. And that means also the possibility of a kind of hot war reigniting in Afghanistan all over again. Look, I'll say it like this. Last week, Biden said that the al-Qaeda threat was gone, and he was promptly fact-checked, believe it or not, by CNN and the New York Post. And today, his own Pentagon contradicted him. Of course, al-Qaeda is not gone. They're still very much a player in Afghanistan. Biden has no clue what's going on. I'll say this, the only way to handle this, as I said on radio, is with overwhelming brutality, because brutes only know brutality. These kittens and sunshine people who don't understand this, these are the people who get our people killed. Their reluctance to clinically view these geopolitical situations creates a hesitation that sends our troops home in flag-draped boxes. And their lack of fortitude to do what sometimes needs to be done to dragon slay in an era of dragons, it weakens us as a nation and makes future generations more vulnerable to attack. Our approach to the Taliban should come in the spirit of Tom Cruise's greatest role. It's one of the greatest, most cinematic masterpieces ever committed to celluloid, and that is, of course, the character of Les Grossman. The Taliban should be told that we are going to stay for as long as it takes to evacuate all remaining Americans and SIVs. And don't give me the garbage about the Americans who want to return, because no one wants to stay in the hellscape that is a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. They're just setting that up as some victim-blaming narrative because they're anticipating Americans left behind, or I should say abandoned. No, our only recourse is to tell the Taliban that we will leave after our assets are extricated and threaten to unleash a holy hell upon them that will make ISIS-K and all of their future generations of Taliban and Al-Qaeda and ISIS look under their beds for our special forces before they close their eyes to go to sleep at night. You punch in and you punch out with our assets, and then you bounce. We're going to talk about that more in depth here coming up. But right now, turning back to the coronavirus, specifically the pandemic, the mandates. Of course, we talked about this yesterday, but not just what's happening in America, also countries across the world, countries like Australia. So is the cure becoming worse than the disease? Kind of seems that way in some of these countries. We're imposing so many mandates and rules, almost always circumventing democracy to do so. So take a step back and consider the implications. If you were told just a couple of years ago that you would be confined to your home at times and your kids would be asked to wear a mask all day in school, even though there's no science that absolutely supports their reduced transmission, and the government would compel you to inject a solution into your body with no supportive long-term studies, and you can't ask any questions about protection or inoculation because you're going to be told that you're a conspiracy, anti-vax theorist, whatever. But here we are because it's all the reality. It's cliche. It was first 15 days to slow the spread. We're now 18 months into this pandemic. And even though we have all of these miraculous vaccines that seem to really be more therapeutical in terms of lessening severity, it seems that we're better than where we started. I mean, except we're in a forever pandemic now, right? No one's announced this. This is an endemic virus, but all the goals have changed. The goalposts have moved, right? Slow the spread. That's no longer the objective. We're not talking about 15 days anymore. And now we seem to be aiming for COVID-0, which is not a realistic goal to have because it's a virus. No one says this is the goal, but really, well, except actually, I would say maybe for Anthony Fauci, but this is the new reality. And if you accept that this is the new unstated goal to eradicate the world of all coronavirus, I mean, that seems to really, like I said, Fauci's the only one who said this. Everyone else just kind of hints towards it. So they think the only way to achieve this is mass universal vaccination. The end of subject, end of discussion. No discussion of natural immunity is invited. So get vaccinated, they tell you. If you have questions, there are no answers. You're not going to get good answers. You're going to be shunned and shamed by the vax bullies. That's really what it is. And if you don't get the vaccine, you're a terrible Satanist who probably eats babies and burns kittens, and you're just going to take the earth on to hell. That's what's going to happen with you. Now, this is like authoritarianism, and that authoritarian moments like this are often precursors to very bad things. Like, this is already bad. The latest authoritarian way to pressure you to get the vaccine is making employers mandate that you be vaccinated. So here's the president yesterday, laser focused not on rescuing Americans trapped in Afghanistan, but on telling you what to do with your body. Your body, his choice. Watch.
Today I'm calling on more companies, I should say, in the private sector to step up with vaccine requirements that'll reach millions more people. If you're a business leader, a nonprofit leader, a state or local leader, who has been waiting for full FDA approval to require vaccinations, I call on you now to do that. Require it. Do what I did last month. Require your employees to get vaccinated or face strict requirements.
If we're going to start telling employees that they have to get a solution injected, and we're going to start mandating employees do certain things on their off period or related to their health that go above and beyond what the government is allowed to mandate or enforce on people, then I think turnabout's fair play. Let's have some tit for tat here, okay? Let's go ahead. If we're going to do this, let's put it all out there. Let's be one big happy family and disclose everything. So the next time you walk into a building, if you are in New York and they ask, where's your Vax Pass, go ahead and ask them where their toxicology report is. Just ask them, can you go ahead and show me what your toxicology report is? Have you been tested for any, I mean, we were in an opioid epidemic. Or what about any kind of testing or vaccinations for communicable diseases like hepatitis A or hepatitis B? Do you have anything on that? What about sexually transmitted diseases? I'm going to need to see all of your paperwork on that. Show me your papers can go both ways. Is that really the door that they want to open? Because I guarantee you that's the porch they're standing on. So here's Dr. Fauci on the employee mandates that the FDA has now partially approved for the Pfizer vaccine. And by when I say partially, I mean for adults. We got word this morning that it appears in September is when it's going to be full approval for the Pfizer vaccine for children for those ages 15 and younger. Watch this.
They're going to give a lot of incentive and backing for a lot of institutions and organizations and places of employment to mandate. And that could be colleges, university, the military, organizations that employ a lot of people. Some of the big corporations are going to say, if you want to work for us in person, you've got to be there and get vaccinated. And I think that's a good thing. I know I respect people's freedom, but when you're talking about a public health crisis that we've been going through now for well over a year and a half, the time has come. Enough is enough. We've just got to get people vaccinated.
This is when he gets out of his lane. He needs to be fine with just talking about public health policy and not getting into or talking about really vaccines and viruses, not advocating that crossover from his day job over at infectious diseases and getting into advocating and setting law on public policy. He's advocating for this, and this is what our government follows. It creates a two-tiered society, and it demands that employers ask super invasive questions about people's health. It makes it a prerequisite for employment and just going out and being with other individuals, right? I mean, we were talking about this. Are you going to ask? I mean, I mentioned a whole plethora of things. What about HIV statuses? That was like the big thing that you actually didn't ask back in the 90s. Remember that? And if a company demands vaccinations, and this is a big question, are they liable if there's an adverse reaction? What about workers' comp? Would you receive it if you had an adverse reaction from a vaccine? Is this making anybody safer? If you're vaccinated, you're safe, right? But if everyone has to be vaccinated, including people who have already natural immunity, why? That doesn't make any sense to me. To achieve this magical COVID zero, what else makes sense? And COVID zero is not even possible. You can't eradicate the flu, not even the common cold. That's the most common coronavirus. So no, the answer is no. We're not going to eradicate a virus. But yet, Fauci says that if we all get vaccinated, that's the key to getting back to a normal life. So how many boosters does it take, right? I mean, if you just wear masks and you lock down and you social distance and you take your 20th booster shot, then maybe you can go out to a beer garden and drink your beer through a mask, right? But that new normal never actually returns. And Fauci says now normalcy, guys, should return in spring 2022. I'm not joking. He actually says this.
If we can get through this winter and get really the majority, overwhelming majority of the 90 million people who have not been vaccinated, I hope we could start to get some good control in the spring of 2022.
So spring 2022, that's the new goal for normalcy. And then when it's not, when another variant crops up, then what's going to happen? Because remember, you could lock everyone away, but you still have animal reservoirs. This is one of the things that was discovered. So he also says in this interview, though, that the virus is very tricky. They didn't see Delta coming, so they can't be sure. And that's why I say we're like in this forever pandemic. This is an endemic virus. It's not being recognized as such. So every time that there's any kind of variant that pops up, everyone's going to have to go through the same thing again, right? And they're going to pretend it's COVID zero. That's the goal. And that and really you're going to see cures worse than the disease. The mask, vax or no vax, it now seems to be this permanent forever feature of American life. Now, here's Fauci again, following the science. When he's talking about, we just need to wear a mask. Remember the emails that came out when he was telling people that honestly, they don't actually work. And if you wanted to read studies on them, there was actually several studies, one Dutch study that got into how the virus particles are smaller than that of smoke particles. But we still have to wear a face covering. It doesn't even matter which kind. Follow the science, but not really. Watch.
What is your view, Dr. Fauci, right now on masks in light of the Delta variant? Are surgical masks good enough, or should everyone be wearing now N95s, KN95s in indoor venues?
You know, Mady, instead of worrying about what kind of mask, just wear a mask. Wear a mask. You know, wear a surgical mask, a cloth mask. Some people can't tolerate N95s. Rather than saying one versus the other, we need to wear masks. And the Delta variant has changed the playing field.
So again, vax or no vax, everyone just needs to wear a mask, right? Vax and mask. And when will this end? Maybe never. After all, the vaccine doesn't eliminate the need for masks that actually don't work, according to Fauci. So why should masks ever go away in the future with more variants on the way? There's already like a COVID-22. Have you just heard about this? Yeah, it's just the new and improved COVID. So this is why I asked, the cure, it's worse than the disease, right? And on this point, you should really discuss and look at what's happening in Australia. This is crazy. This is like some dystopian sci-fi movie down here. Soylent Green is going to be on the menu. This is a quick rundown of what's happening down under with regards to Australia's insane, draconian's not even correct, it's insane efforts to get to the non-existent COVID zero. And again, that has to be the new goal because Australia is averaging 1 fatality per day over the summer in a country of millions of people, over 25 million. Yet the country is beginning to, actually it's a surveillance state. CCP would be proud. Watch this news piece.
There's little sympathy for anyone ignoring the health orders, even this group of teenagers caught partying after dark at the bottom of the North Bondi Cliffs. Herded to higher ground by Polaire's spotlight and speaker, the 8 boys were placed in handcuffs and left to explain a $1,000 fine to mum.
681 penalty infringement notices issued in the last 24 hours. More than 400 of those notices were again for people being outside of their home without a reasonable excuse.
It's getting harder and harder to hide if you're doing the wrong thing, especially in the construction industry. A crackdown following on from the recent shutdown. Workers sent home if their paperwork isn't in check. Our camera's rolling on another random blitz in Marsden Park.
Authorising me under the Public Health Act.
Inspectors have asked these tradesmen to show proof of their QR check-in as well as identification and vaccination records. One of the men here is from Campsie and he doesn't have his documentation, so he's being sent home. He may lose a chunk of his pay too if officers follow through with a fine.
Oh my gosh, so in the attempt to get to COVID-0, this is Australia's cure for the disease. Public shaming of people on TV, arresting teenagers who are almost at, really zero risk from this. And get this, according to Australia's Department of Health, there's been one death under the age of 19 since the very beginning of the pandemic. But teenagers, well, you get an entire news piece if you decide to hang out on the beach together. It's not like they're selling meth, good grief. And people are asking workers for their papers so they can work outside at a construction site. No, I know Australia began as a penal colony, but why did they have to revert back to that? It's so bad that local reports say, and I am not going to probably get through this point, this makes me infuriated. A group of dogs they were sent to a rescue, sent to a shelter. They were shot and killed by local officials. And the local officials said that they had to do this to prevent shelter volunteers from traveling and potentially spreading infections. In addition to murdering the dogs, they're building a quarantine camp set to open in 2022. From the Victoria government website, quote, with quarantine continuing to be a critical part of the Australian response to COVID-19 pandemic, the Victorian and Australian governments have committed to building a purpose-built quarantine accommodation hub outside of Melbourne's CBD to combat and protect the community from the highly infectious COVID-19, end quote. Now, some point out that currently people returning from abroad in Australia are already quarantined in hotels, so this is just a government facility with the same objective. But here are the plans, some of the plans for the camp. Notice the quarantine camp is set to open in 2022. Australia's government has resigned themselves to be in a forever pandemic, which COVID-0 is the goal. They clearly do not see this ending in 2022 or beyond. Only nobody announced COVID-0 as the new goal. We're just told that we have to do all of this and you can't ask questions. It's for our safety. Meanwhile, we've traded all sorts of freedoms in the West, our ability to move, gather, control what goes on in our bodies, and for the most part, there's no discussion about any of it. You're not allowed. Just mandates. Certainly, these impositions aren't happening via the democratic process, but through not even really legislation. It's all happening by government agency edicts, like the CDC just announcing unconstitutionally that they're going to redefine renters agreements in states and completely usurp 10th Amendment commandeering. No discussion. It's illegal, but it doesn't matter. And the government makes up the rules because science doesn't matter, apparently. And we're supposed to follow the non-science-based rules and not ask questions because it's not science to question non-science. So if you don't follow the rules, questions are bad, like in Australia, and increasingly in America. The shaming and the blaming, all of it, anyone who doesn't toe the line. And the only difference between America and Australia at this point, well, we still have Second Amendment rights and we still have people who are sticking up to this. So hopefully Australia can get a little bit of their voice back. Finally, this last weekend, though it seems Australians did have enough, and when they did push back on these policies, they were met with the full force of the Australian government. This is literally just like it was actually a peaceful protest. So that's where we're at in the West. Unofficial COVID-0 as the new goal. So we're imposing cures that seem to be worse than the disease, and there's no end in sight. So we have a lot more ahead. We're going to continue watching this, and we're also going to talk and do a deep dive on the latest with Afghanistan and so much more. Coming up, Major General Jeffrey Schlosser joins me to discuss the mistakes that led to the chaos. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company, and they proudly serve premium coffee to people who love coffee and America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. They're committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So it's August. Drink your coffee. I don't care how you have it. I don't care if you have it in your car with screaming kids on a school run. No one cares. Just drink your coffee. And if you like coffee, drink Black Rifle coffee, unless you like expensive over-roasted beans that are drunk by hipsters who pretend that they enjoy coffee. So this August, Black Rifle coffee is here to fuel your way. I would talk about cans of 300, but we crack them all through the summer. So you know that they roast their beans that they get all over the world in Tennessee and Utah, and they want you to order yours today. Head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV. Code DanaTV at checkout. Get you 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel whatever is left of your summer with America's coffee. Black Rifle Coffee.
If you do have to adjust the timeline, how long are you talking about?
I'm not going to get ahead of any contingency plans that are drawn up by the State Department and the Defense Department. As you all know, the President has been meeting and attended and participated in briefings with his national security team once a day, sometimes twice a day, is in constant and regular contact, and I expect we'll get some updates in short order.
And when do you need to start pulling troops out of the Kabul airport to meet the August 31 target?
It's a great question, Steve. I just don't want to get into operational details that are under the purview of the Department of Defense. Go ahead. But you are correct. I will note that it would not be, there would have to be time in advance of the 31st or time in advance of whatever the date is in order to do that. But they can give you the operational details.
That is White House spokesperson Jen Psaki refusing to answer about when the United States will begin to pull troops out of Afghanistan, although it was indicated that it was starting tonight, in fact, within 72 hours. Ooh, a lot of things that are changing. Joining us now, Major General Jeffrey Schlosser is a former commanding general of the 101st Airborne Division and Regional Command East. He's also the author of Marathon War, Leadership and Combat in Afghanistan. He's incredibly generous with his time. He's actually joining us, God love him, in an airport, so he's very in demand, so we could talk to him and get his expertise on this. Major General, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, I have got to get your reaction to this very swift change of plan here. At first, it was we went from not really knowing, then it was we're going to commit to this August 31st. Seemingly, the Taliban was going to direct the terms here. We have no idea what kind of details of any kind of accommodations or deals that were made with them. And now we hear from the State Department just a little bit earlier that it looks like there's going to be at least some kind of drawdown that begins today. I don't even think we've been able to confirm how many Americans are still left behind in Kabul. That's something that Jen Psaki said wouldn't be available until tomorrow. Your thoughts on this and how unusual is this in your perspective, sir?
Well, I believe it's deeply troubling. I mean, I think August 31st was a stretch, and now to see potentially a shorter timeline, I think is very, very challenging for the U.S. military to try to do anything significant as far as actually getting to the Afghan interpreters and those that helped us. Perhaps the U.S. citizens, but the interpreters, I think, are going to be in dire straits.
Yes, and I would imagine that, especially considering we really don't have any on-the-ground surveillance, we haven't since the previous administration, and making enemies or losing the allyship of people that were so helpful to us in decentralizing the Taliban and preventing Al-Qaeda from continuing after 9/11, I would imagine that that's really going to hinder us in addition to all the other problems, but not having any kind of intel on the ground after departure if we're not able to get out these Afghan assets. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's also going to hinder us in the future about trying to track Al-Qaeda and Islamic State as well. I mean, without having human intelligence on the ground, without having some security from the military, it's going to be deeply challenging, really hard.
Yeah, very difficult. This decision to make this announcement before we had everyone evacuated, before we had the visas processed, before we were getting out these Afghan assets, I've never seen anything like that happening. Normal, I would just imagine, this is from my civilian perspective, that any such announcement would be made after that process was almost near completion, if not completed already, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think many of us are scratching our heads, those of us that have military backgrounds or intelligence backgrounds. It could well be that we know that William Burns, director of CIA, met with Mullah Beretta, which is incredible to believe that, but this morning. It could be that there is actually a threat from Islamic State who hates Taliban and they hate America, and that could be behind us. I don't know. That is just, my own thoughts.
That's very interesting, though, because we had heard that ISIS, or at least ISIS-K, the variant from the Khorasan province, had rolled in Sunday, and they were outside. And if they are if they're not really so much as allies with Taliban, they hate Taliban. I mean, that very well could, as weird as it is, and just to speculate with this, it could be the Taliban saying, you're going to have to get out regardless. Trouble's coming and there's nothing anyone can do. And that, you think, would explain some of this expeditious movement from going from August 31st to 72 hours?
Well, that's actually a rational explanation. I have no inside knowledge about that, but I do know that Islamic State is absolutely, stunningly, even in the last year and a half, the girls' school where the 85 girls were killed in a bombing, that was Islamic State. The Taliban does not want that reputation, and I suspect that this is behind us.
Wow. So what do you think is going to happen after the United States, say that we are able to have a successful extrication of Americans and assets? What are we leaving, and what will we see from Afghanistan, say, in the next 12 months, do you think, from your experience?
I think that what we are going to see over time here, 12 months to 24 months, is Al-Qaeda move back in as a safe haven. I don't think the Taliban will keep them from actually using the place to train. They'll have training camps, they'll be planning, and you may well see threats emanating from Afghanistan, from Al-Qaeda, potentially from Islamic State as well, that is directed against the United States. And that's obviously troubling for all citizens in America.
Yeah, very troubling indeed. We're talking with Major General Jeffrey Schlosser here on this whole, it's still very fluid, this unfolding situation in Afghanistan. One final question for you, sir. This issue of President Biden talking with G7 leaders this morning, and they had agreed to this August 31st deadline, apparently, or even extending beyond it just to get, however long it took, apparently, to evacuate assets and citizens. And then the president came back and said, no, it's going to be August 31st. Now it looks like it's going to be an even shorter time. There was accusations coming from surrogates of Downing Street that this really is undercutting that G7 alliance. What are your thoughts on that? And was that an unforced error? I've never seen anything like that, actually, from Democrat or Republican, honestly.
Well, I have to say that I think that many of the G7 countries are very disappointed in this decision. They were, I think, actually disappointed in us actually choosing to get certain to withdraw. I think they would have expected a longer period of time to do this in a proper manner, more deliberate, so that everybody could get their citizens out, and then all of the people that have helped these nations throughout the last 20 years, including America. I think that they're going to find this very disappointing, and this may have a impact on the relationship between them and the United States.
There's going to be so much to watch with this in the upcoming weeks, for sure. Very fluid situation. We appreciate you joining us. Even at the airport, we know you're very busy. Major General Jeffrey Schlosser, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney is doing her part to help get those who are stranded or abandoned, I think that's probably the safest word to use at this point, in Afghanistan, out. She joins me next to break it down. Stay with us. New York Congresswoman, I'm going to start that over. Here we go, clap it again. Tongue-tied. It's the longest day ever. New York Congresswoman Claudia Tenney is doing her part to help get abandoned Americans. We're going past stranded out of Afghanistan. She's drafting a bill to prohibit the U.S. government from charging, because get this, it's law, like $2,000 for a flight, charging American citizens for evacuation flights after she learned that they may actually be charging people to get out of a situation that the Biden administration created. Tenney is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and she's called on Biden to resign for his mishandling of this crisis. And the Congresswoman joins me now. So good to see you. And I really want to talk about the Flights for Freedom, because this is insane to me. And I understand that somehow this is like some obscure part of the law where it's like $2,000 if an American is in a really rough, part of the world, an emergency happens, something breaks out, unrest. They actually have to reimburse the U.S. government up to a certain amount to to evacuate. But with this, what we were hearing was that Americans were being charged $2,000 per flight, even more for Afghan assets. What can you tell us about this and how the Biden administration says it was changed, but apparently it's still up and they're still using it?
Well, unfortunately, they're not doing a whole lot to help us evacuate American citizens or Afghans or our allies out of Afghanistan right now, all those people that are stranded there. But what this bill will do is give the Secretary of State the power to waive that fee for people who are trying to be evacuated from this emergency situation in Afghanistan. And so I've got my colleague Brian Mast from Florida, the representative who served in Afghanistan, and Tom Tiffany and others are joining us to make sure that we aren't penalizing these people even more who are in this terrifying and perilous situation in Afghanistan right now.
I would imagine that your office, that you're hearing a lot from, whether it is, veterans who are saying, these are people who helped us when I served over there. I know that this seems to be, it's common, and it's scary to me that it's common because it just shows how decentralized and haphazard the planning for evacuation was, if it existed at all. I know your office is involved in these efforts. What can you tell us about those?
This is a colossal disaster. We are working with private entities. We're working with people with philanthropic interests who are mostly former military members, believe it or not, who want to continue to provide us aid. And we're using private contractors, former military people with the ability to be on the ground to help people get from their homes or safe houses to the airport, and from that point onto a private plane and out of the country. We're very cognizant of the concerns about Afghans who have not been vetted and the possibility of errors being made. So we are making sure that these people are evacuated to other countries before they're allowed to get into the United States. We're trying to minimize or eliminate that and make sure they get vetted by the State Department. They're all being vetted before they even get on a plane in Afghanistan, but we're doing we're attempting to do an additional screening before we get them into the United States. But again, we have an open southern border, so I can't imagine that the Chinese and the Russians and everybody else involved in international terror and their
right.
surrogates are out there trying to get people across the border. We are in a more dangerous and perilous situation than we've been in for over 20 years since this all started 20 years ago.
Last quick question for you, Congresswoman. We heard from the State Department, from DOD, from Jen Psaki a little bit ago, not so much from Biden, who he doesn't like to take questions apparently, but what we were hearing is that there's no assurance of, apparently we're going to have a military drawdown that's going to be completely draw down before August 31st, and there's no assurances or no answers to the questions as to whether or not all of the Americans are going to be evacuated by then. I know that they said that they had a contingency plan for after the 31st, but if there's no military presence there, how in the world are those people going to be extricated? They can't even get to the airport right now.
Exactly. We're at the mercy of the Taliban, a terrorist organization that is out there killing people as we speak right now. Or even surrogates of the Taliban. This is a dangerous situation. That's why we're continuing to work with as many private assets as we can. We're coming up with plans and solutions to get American citizens out of Afghanistan. It is completely reprehensible and unacceptable that we as individual members of Congress, and there are many of us working on this, and private citizens are cleaning up the mess left by Joe Biden, which is why I have called repeatedly for his resignation. And it can't come soon enough because we need to cut our losses now and find a way to solve this issue. And he's not part of the solution.
No, not at all. Goodness, what a mess. And we're going to be watching all of this, and hopefully we can get everyone out that we need to. But man, it would be a lot. I think we'd all feel a lot better knowing that we had some kind of faith in the ability of the administration to get our people out and not strand them. I know Jen Psaki doesn't like that word, but that's what it is. Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, we appreciate your attention to this and doing what you can to help bring Americans home. And hopefully we can do it without having a hostage situation. We'll watch, and I have a feeling we'll be talking with you again soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for getting the message out. Appreciate it.
Of course, of course. We have a lot more up for you. There are a lot of fluid stuff happening this very, very busy news day. Keep it here. We got more next. So you probably noticed by now that the media and the Biden administration have put a target on the back of Ron DeSantis. And that's because Ron DeSantis doesn't fall in line with federal policy on coronavirus and wants to run for president in 2024, probably. The federal government once mandated vaccinations for businesses. So DeSantis bans that. The Fed wants masks, and then DeSantis leaves that decision to wear masks to the people of Florida. And in many parts of Florida, you wouldn't know that there was a pandemic. There is one, of course, but the governor has left it to the people to make right decisions in terms of balancing their safety and freedom and also ability to generate income and run their business to themselves, because that's how it should be. And this bothers the press because, remember, the press is an extension of the Democrat Party. I mean, studies have actually proven this. So they would like to bring down a GOP contender, a presidential frontrunner perhaps for 2024 if Trump doesn't run, because DeSantis is a threat to their forever pandemic COVID-0 narrative. And yes, he's a strong candidate for president. The last attack against DeSantis was against him and his press aide. Christina Pushaw saw her Twitter account suspended for 12 hours on Friday after she violated Twitter's completely inconsistent rules on abusive behavior. She had called out the Associated Press after the Associated Press alleged that one of DeSantis's top donors invested in Regeneron, a monoclonal antibody treatment for COVID that the governor has talked about and promoted before, and said it was successful. And it was a hit piece by the Associated Press from a basically illiterate reporter designed to make Ron DeSantis look like a shill for Regeneron. So naturally, Christina Pushaw, his press aide, pushed back on the Associated Press and did so incredibly hard, as she was completely justified in doing. So the governor wrote a letter condemning the Associated Press for the partisan attack, and that's what it was. It was activism trying to masquerade as journalism. And then Pushaw tweeted some fire in the AP's direction. And by fire, we mean legitimate criticism. In one tweet, Christina Pushaw tweeted to Farrington, the half-illiterate AP reporter that wrote the story, that if the story was not changed by the AP, she would, quote, put you on blast, as she ought to have done, by the way, and retweeted another post that said, light them up. Apparently, the Associated Press did not like her tweets very much, and the press because they're used to playing bully. I mean, how many people do they go after any given day? But when you try to hold the press accountable, because the press doesn't police themselves, they dislike that. So following Pushaw's tweets, the Associated Press wrote a letter and asked the governor's office to stop tweeting about them because, oh my gosh, it's 2021 and this woman's hurting our feelings on the internet. They said that this type of behavior can cause great harm because that's only things that snowflakes and pansies say, suggesting that Pushaw's tweets were irresponsible or dangerous by people who have no idea what free speech is or actual threatening language. And since Twitter and the media are basically all working together, Twitter actually suspended Christina Pushaw's account for 12 hours for the simple reason that she justifiably criticized a hit piece that actually did more damage and violated Twitter's abusive rules more so than Pushaw's calling out of such a hackneyed job did in the first place. But Pushaw's not backing down. In a statement, she said this, and I quote, "It's appalling for a social media platform to ban the press secretary of a democratically elected official while allowing the Taliban to live tweet their conquest of Afghanistan," end quote. And she's correct. She also added, "It's amazing how eager media activists are to defend each other. Journalists of all people should see how the AP's headline and framing was dishonest. It was a hit piece. They cannot defend the story, so they're trying to shift the narrative to Florida man bad. We see you." So good on Governor Ron DeSantis and his press secretary, Christina Pushaw. So in other news, as we close today, I leave you with this final bizarre statement from President Cheese. Take a look.
You can do anything a man can do. It's one thing for somebody to say that and keep pounding that in the head of their 5 granddaughters as well. But guess what? Until they see it, until they watch, it becomes real then. That's why, by the way, it happens to be in Asia for me right now, but that's why we have a female vice president of the United States of America we're going to have some presidents pretty soon.
Because that's how it works. The vice president has the presidents, and those presidents come up, and I don't even know what he said, right? And you can do anything, apparently. Even get a prostate exam, ladies. I don't imagine women in Afghanistan are doing too well right now after we handed the country over to the Taliban, so I have no idea what he's talking about. And of course, this was also Kamala Harris, who is in Southeast Asia. Women can do anything a man can do, and oh my gosh, if I have to sit here and talk about the sexism and all of this stuff from this administration, I'm going to jump off my roof and your roof and break my legs off at the knees, because that is more satisfying and comfortable than having to deal with this insane, half-intelligent administration. That does it for us tonight. We'll continue bringing all of the fluid developments with this breakdown in Afghanistan, so make sure you stay tuned. Good night, and don't bend the knee.